welcome back to the CQQC podcast. My name is Gabe, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, as always, Bryan and Nate. And we are back for part 2 of our little mini-series we have here going on with Mr. Professor Kyle Ross. How's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you? Glad to be back for part 2. More rules to talk about, more knowledge to deliver.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back. So, what awkward discussion do we want to have this time, boys? We were talking about peanut butter at the beginning of the podcast. We were talking about potatoes. I kind of like the potato discussion. So the question we had posed before we started the podcast, before we started talking about Quidditch, was, what is your favorite way to eat a potato? So do you want to kind of go around the table and say what our favorite way of eating potato is?
I guess I'll start off. So for me, it's definitely tater tots, number one.
Wasn't tater tots like all you ate for a year at the Quid House? Like, didn't you just order food and eat tater tots?
Tater tots were always my go-to side. In terms of fries.
Can we just remind everyone, just from the start of this, Nate, you have a food nutrition Instagram page, and I'd argue.
It came out of the blue. I was so confused after hearing about how you did nothing but order out, never used the kitchen while you're living at the Quid House in Kingston, and then you had a food Instagram. But
actually, no, that started off in the summer of after I graduated from Queens.
But why did you never cook for a year?
Well, I was in the Quid House for half a semester, and I had the money, so why not?
Start doing it.
Save time in the kitchen.
That's fair.
So as soon as you had the money, you just upgraded from tater tots to actual food?
Yeah, but you know what, though? It's a fair point. Like, when I was in my first year, I put on a lot of weight in school because I went from swimming all the time to not swimming at all and studying engineering. But I also, every Tuesday, Thursday, after that history class that they made engineers in Guelph take for some reason, me and my buddy Eric Hell went to the place in Guelph that serves the really good personal pizzas. And after a whole semester of that, and then continuing in the winter, he put on a shit ton of weight. I put on a shit ton of weight. I come back from the summer, and I was still not big, but large. He came back after working an entire summer, 2 workouts a day, and completely jacked. And I realized I could never do that. I like food too much. I have a problem, but yeah, God. University food, it's a problem. It's scary. It's addicting. Gabe,
Any other potato favorites? You want me to go? Mine, I said either mashed potatoes or a nice breakfast hash with some onion, a little bit of what's that brand? Johnson. Johnson has this breakfast sausage meat, but that's not the actual wiener. It's kind of the breakfast meat or whatever you want to call it. So some of that into a nice breakfast hash is go-to.
Denny's? Going to Denny's?
Oh.
Yeah, Denny's. Yeah,
Denny's.
Shout out Denny's. The Denny's spot.
Many stories from that.
Okay.
Stories.
Quick diversion: breakfast sausage or bacon?
Neither.
Depends.
Nate's
In a breakfast sandwich, we're doing sausage. By itself, we're doing bacon.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, but on the topic of breakfast sausage, are we talking wieners or are we talking patty? That's a big debate.
Well, in a sandwich, it's going to be the patty. On the side, it's going to be the wiener. Speaking of wieners, national champion Davis won.
If Davis, no. If Davis doesn't see this, I will but if he does and I get a message from him, hey, why am I being called a wiener?
Send him the link.
That was the only transition I could think of to get us from breakfast sandwiches to Quidditch.
Okay. Sorry, real quick. Gabe, good choice. Kyle, what do you got?
Oh, for potatoes?
Potatoes.
I'm gonna pretend like I have a food Instagram for a second, and I'm gonna go with cooking potatoes in chicken stock with some fresh oregano, some other spices until the chicken stock reduces down to coat the potatoes.
Very nice. Very nice.
Gordon Ramsay would approve, I would say.
Yep. I'm going to go with my answer that I basically had because I watch too much TikTok nowadays, and it's something called smashed potatoes. Look it up. I don't want to explain it. Get mini potatoes, smash them, and make them crispy. They're great. They're absolutely great. But comment below what's the best potato and why.
Is that like when you make a smashed burger just by smashing meat and grilling it?
Yeah, similar enough. You like squish it down with something after you cook it, and then I don't know. It's all about, in my mind, engineering mind, it's all about increased surface area so you get as much crispiness as possible. That's the goal. I don't like the soft texture of mashed potatoes. It's gross. I just had it for dinner, and I enjoyed it, but it's not the best. It's all about that crispiness. Talking about crispiness.
Fair enough.
Hard transition. I don't know. We're going back to Quidditch, guys. Now you could, instead of like...
We'll end the awkward segment. We need a sponsor. Someone needs to sponsor that awkward segment. Maybe we can get Cavendish someone to sponsor us.
3-time medalist Davis Wong.
I mean, I think Davis's favorite restaurant is Denny's, so if you could get Denny's.
Hey, Denny's. Anyone that works at Denny's, if you are listening, we would love to sponsor.
I could reach out to them. We'll collaborate.
I'd be down to get like a Denny's sponsorship for my team. Any team, like for this podcast too, like Denny's, please hit us up. There's not enough of you in Canada. We need more.
Or Tim Horton. No, Tim Horton too. Quidditch Canada. If Quidditch Canada could line up a Tim Horton sponsorship, scholarship would be nice too, but a sponsorship that would be pretty great.
You get your full ride through school if you're on a Quidditch team by Tim Horton. Free education and free coffee for the 4 years. Sounds good to me.
I'd do it. If I only had to eat Tim Hortons, for the most part, I think I'd be okay.
I don't think you'd be able to play Quidditch just eating Tim Hortons for 4 years.
There's the chili.
Definitely going downhill.
The chili.
Yeah, sure. There's some chili. Yeah.
They use real. But
you're telling me you have free Tim Hortons for 4 years. You're not eating a ton of donuts.
Sour cream glazed, yes. Everything else, flip. Okay, Gabe, I want to point out real quickly. Hard transition back to the food. The new eggs for Tim Hortons suck. That's all. That's all I have to say.
You're wrong. No.
The old frozen powder mixed whatever eggs were better.
Oh,
that's
God.
it. I'm not taking any debate. The old ones are better. The new ones are greasy. I hate them.
The new ones taste like eggs.
I don't want them to taste like eggs. Weird. I want them to taste like crap.
I'm glad that my sausage and egg, not McMuffin, but English muffin now tastes like sausage and egg in an English muffin.
I disagree.
Okay. All right, boys. Let's transition.
Speaking of changes to things we know and love, let's talk about some rule changes.
There we go. Yes.
I like it. The transition we needed.
Smooth transition. 5 minutes ago.
Oh, jeez.
All right.
Go ahead.
So the first topic we're gonna go over today, boys, was the possession and startup procedure. So I don't know if you kind of want to just flow with it, Kyle, and talk about different changes that have been put into place.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you start me off on a topic, and I will rant until I transition through as many topics as we can get to in an hour.
Well, let's start with the start then. So, startup procedure. We're all familiar with the old one. It's been around for years. I think it's been around. It hasn't changed since it started until this iteration of rules. Kyle, what's the...
I think the only thing that's changed is the ball positions have been spread out a little bit to give some more room. But other than that, the idea of running as fast as you can at someone else has not changed, no.
And changed from in line with the hoops versus keeper line. That's the only other positional change. What's the problem with that?
Well, running as fast as you can at another player without the intent to wrap them and just the intent to hit each other as hard as you can is unsurprisingly not the safest thing you can do in a sport. We've seen many injuries off of the Brooms Up, either people colliding. I've had my thumb sprained or dislocated a number of times because you get to the ball at the same time as someone else. They kick it while you put your hand on it. Sure, they get a yellow card, but your thumb's gone. Sliding to it, tripping over people as they're bending down to get the ball. All in all, not a safe way to be going about things. And if there is a large mismatch in the size of the players going for the ball, it typically results in just an easy goal for one team, not because they were the most skilled, but because they were the fastest. Because tackling and stopping someone who's now at full speed when you're not at full speed and you're backpedaling is not something you could do. So your only option is to run at them as hard as you can and hit them as hard as you can, while trying to make a wrap in order to slow them down. So we are looking to transition that out. The first change was to move the starting line from the hoop line to the keeper zone line to hopefully reduce the speed at which people are colliding. It did reduce the speed at which people are colliding. I don't have the stats on hand in terms of injuries, but we still saw a ton of injuries, so it's clearly not safe enough. You even look at other sports, and there's not a whole lot of sports that do the same thing that we're doing. There's football, which I believe we talked about in the last podcast, where they have fair catch rules to prevent collisions. And also even they are trying to change their rules and experiment with other rules for doing kickoffs that do not result in players running at full speed at each other. So I know there's a number of options floating out there, a number of people pitching ideas. In the most recent proposed rulebook for Quidditch Canada, we pitched maybe not the version that we think is the best and works the best in all scenarios, but a version that we think can be implemented quickly and safely and will not have any unforeseen consequences to the game. And that is to switch to a jump ball procedure, kind of similar in idea to basketball. What I also like about basketball jump ball, thank you. What I also like about jump ball, which I like to remind people, is that in Quidditch, as it is in the books, Quidditch starts with a jump ball. So we're moving away from something we've been doing towards something that is more realistic and safer and doesn't result in such free, easy goals.
And technically, origin-specific accurate, although we're trying to stay away from
technically origin-specific accurate.
Yeah. Trying to stay away from Harry Potter, but yeah.
With the jump ball, like I was curious, like do the teams have to stay on their own side, or is it kind of like basketball where you can kind of overlap to the side so that like a player can push the ball forward? You know what I mean? Does it have to be kept?
Well, so you could push it forward. So teams have to stay on their own side, one.
Okay.
Secondly, they could push it forward. However, the rules specify that the person jumping for the ball cannot gain full possession of it first. Okay. So they could tip it forward, but that's only just going to give it to the other team.
Right.
And by saying that they can't have sole possession first, that means they can't just put out their tallest person and just have the tall person stand up and just catch the ball and say, okay, I have possession now. The ball has to be knocked back.
The Jonathan Gola exception.
The Jonathan Gola exception, sure. But, so the main idea behind it is in the time it takes to toss the ball up, have the ball knocked back, have someone recover the ball and begin moving, by that time, the beaters should be at the bludgers. And if the beaters are at the bludgers and they have possession of the bludgers, it then makes stopping a run much easier than it was previously, where everyone is running at the same speed to get the ball, and then you have to stop, pick up a bludger, and then catch up with the person who's now blown by you, running at full speed. Now you will have the bludgers as the quaffle player is beginning to make their run with the quaffle, so you have plenty of time to get back, set up on defense. With two-armed form tackling now, the defense is going to be a lot stronger, so you're going to see much less, hopefully, of teams getting the ball and just running full tilt into each other, because it's not going to result in a easy goal like it would previously. And I know a lot of people had questions on. A lot of people said no jump ball for years because they couldn't understand how we could do a jump ball for all the balls. And they're correct. You cannot do a jump ball for all the balls. That's insane. But you'll notice the injuries happened almost, I won't say exclusively, but most often to the quaffle players because their attempt is to pick up the ball and blow through the other person running at them. A beater's goal is to pick up the ball and do something with it. So you don't see them tuck the ball into the crook of their arm and blow through the other beaters. You see them pick it up because they need to deliver a beat on the quaffle player almost immediately if they're hoping to stop that drive. So in that way, the beaters looked a lot more like how I'm sure we're familiar with doing dodgeball in elementary school and high school, which is you run, you stop at the line, you pick up the ball, and you move backwards. And there's a reason that in elementary school and high school, you didn't get to pick up the ball and continue running and go hit people with the dodgeball. That usually the teacher said you have to touch the ball against the wall or something because they don't want you running head first at each other because they know that it causes injuries.
And I think when Kyle, you and me talked about this for a long time when you were proposing this idea, one of the things that when we talked about the idea of as non-beaters, as quaffle players, we tried to imagine what a beater would do where the ball is. So if you knock the ball up and let's say it goes toward my side away from Kyle, Kyle's beaters aren't looking sideways, or my beaters aren't looking sideways to where the quaffle would have used to been, and where there's a contest to see, okay, am I worried about looking back to defend? Am I going to have to make a quick beat? What's going on? Their sole purpose and focus now will be on getting the bludger because nothing's happening beside them. They have a better view what's happening across with the other bludger, and they can look to the other side as well. They have a more defined focus on what's going on in the kind of contested areas. The quaffle's going to be knocked back somewhere in the middle of the field, for either half, so hopefully it doesn't cause as many issues. We still have to test it out, obviously, but logically it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and the main issue with it that people brought up was the fact that we live in Canada, and for anyone who was at the Quidditch Canada Nationals in Hamilton 2 years ago, they understand that the wind in Canada can sometimes be extreme, and jump ball would definitely not work in what was hurricane level winds that we were experiencing at those nationals. But also the hoops didn't work, and even putting balls on the ground didn't work. They rolled away. So wind is a factor no matter what you're going to do. But I do understand people's concerns around wind, and we are looking at alternative methods to do in situations when the weather is such that a jump ball would be far too difficult to do. But in general, the way that the jump ball is set up, it's not winning. Right now, winning Brooms up almost guarantees you a point.
Yeah.
If you win it by a lot. With switching to jump ball, winning the ball guarantees you a possession, but it in no way guarantees that you're going to score. So, and also then you switch sides at half, so the win should then be on your side for the second half. So you should get the benefit in the second half, so you would get the possession then, so it should all balance itself out, and it should work out, but we are looking at other options that won't have the wind affect us so much.
Nice.
Another good reason for switching at halves.
Yeah. Well, to continue that, I guess there's another way to switch it, and that was proposed by IQA and originally by a former guest of this show, Christos Caldes, another friend of the show. Kyle, can you explain what goes on in the IQA method? Because it's a little complicated. I think it's referred to as BUCS, B-U-C-S method.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
So as I remember it, all players start off the pitch, and all the balls start on the pitch in some interesting positions where the quaffle is towards the center of the field, the bludgers closer to the sideline, and then there's bludgers placed in the halves of the teams close to their hoops. And the idea is that you all run onto the field at the same time and you collect up the balls and you go from there. So it stops people from running directly at each other because now they're running onto the pitch sideways, so they're running side by side with each other. For Harry Potter fans, I like to picture what it looks like when Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter are running to get the cup at the end of Goblet of Fire. It's a lot like that, in theory. But I believe in maybe not the version that I looked at with Christos, but the version that they propose, you are able to have someone on your team in the other team's end. Yeah. It's an interesting idea. It does account for the wind. There are a number of issues with it that I felt needed some testing, especially around the measurements for where the balls should be placed. With the jump ball method, I don't need to measure where the balls should be placed. We know already where they should be placed. With a method of placing balls along the field, you need to be very careful with the measurements such that the quaffle carrier cannot get the ball and strive towards the hoop and get on a free shot before a beater has a bludger to stop it. And that's the main concern with that method, among the fact that whoever gets the fastest jump off the line on the brooms up gets the ball. Because if you outpace your opponent even by a step, you can step in front of them. And once you're in front of them, because of the rules of Quidditch, they can't go anywhere near you, because if they clip your back heel while they're behind you, well, that's contact from behind and tripping, and that's a penalty. So as soon as you're in front, you have that ball, and what I imagine could be the case at the beginning, if you're both sprinting full out, what first person gets the ball, bends down, goes to pick it up, second person, tabletops themselves over the person who's bending down, and we're back to injuries. Bryan looks like he's looking up rules. Maybe they have to stay kind of on their own side, but either way, you're going to get to that ball before the other person. The other person's sprinting full speed right up behind you. Now, you could bend down, pick it up, and continue sprinting. And in that case, what I would instruct my players to do, especially because the hoops have been widened this season, is I would instruct my players, if they are the fastest, to pick up the ball and sprint as fast as they can at the other team's hoops. And as soon as the beater goes to pick up the ball that's on the ground, take a shot. You give up possession, but if you're a good shooter, you now have an open shot on the hoops for free. So it could end up in a lot of free goals. That might not be the case, but that is something that could happen if the measurements are not made such to prevent that. And because we're currently in lockdown and we can't do any testing, we at Quidditch Canada did not feel comfortable putting this in place without doing robust testing to make sure that the start wasn't just going to result in free shots leading to free goals at the beginning of the game, which is then repeated in the second half. That is also then compounded by the fact that you can have one of your players on the other team's side. So if you are fastest and your partner's fastest, you could end up with a free 2 on a beater as the beater's trying to pick up the ball, where you take a shot, and if you're off by a little bit, well, your partner's there to pick it up for you, you might not even lose possession. So I didn't like the play patterns that were possible with the start, and I did see how it solved some of the issues, but it did create some new ones, and it didn't seem like it would solve kind of the main issue of whoever wins Brooms Up has a significant advantage. And I didn't feel comfortable implementing it without testing, which is why we went with a method that we know works, because we've seen it in any number of sports, including Quidditch, originally.
So just to fact check you here real quick. I think everything you said more or less correct. I think I'm blind without my glasses, so like it's a little hard for me here. So I believe when it comes to chasers, you have to have one chaser on the other side. Yeah. I don't think it exactly specifies to what distance back, what distance forward. I can't remember. I will have the setup on screen while we're talking about this. And yeah, when it comes to where lineup is, the two beaters are basically where the quaffle is, and they're facing toward the beater or the bludger away from like the sideline that has the teams on it, and then basically where like the seeker boxes or the penalty box, that's where those starting chasers are. So they're running toward the beaters who are placed at the quaffle, and those beaters are running toward a bludger, which is farther down the midline.
I think you got it opposite.
Did I?
I'm pretty sure the beaters start behind the chasers.
Sorry, maybe my mistake. But either way, there's a lineup in that sense.
Yeah. The beaters are behind the chasers. The chasers are first out the gate, and they run to about middle to pick up the quaffle, and the beaters would be behind them, contesting a bludger. So there's one bludger placed on middle that they're contesting. Mm-hmm. And because of how close it is to the sideline, that is going to be very contested, and it will be unlikely that one person gets sole and clear possession right away enough to beat the quaffle player in the back quickly.
Yes.
So the main defense is the bludger running to pick up the beater running to pick up the bludger in their zone. And that's where I feel testing is needed to place that bludger in such a way that the beater can get it quickly enough to be an actual threat on defense, to protect the far hoop from a free shot.
Okay.
Now, I could be wrong. It's hard to visualize the speed of a Quidditch player on a diagram. Yeah. But I noticed right away that is something that could happen and needs to be tested. Whereas with a jump ball, tossing it up, the worst thing that's going to happen is not a lot.
And I think if like there's an absolute botch of the bludger going like way off to one side, is there a stipulation we currently have in what the rules are set up of like it could be mutually agreed to retoss or anything? Do you know if that's the chance and what our rule set is?
I believe the head referee for the tip off.
Yeah.
The head referee can redo the toss if they screwed up.
Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. So there's going to need to be some practice involved for HRs to feel comfortable with the toss up for the tip. But there's practice involved for head reffing to begin with. There's things you got to know, things you got to be able to do. If you're in the sport and you're playing the sport, I trust in your ability to toss a ball in the air.
Yeah. So I want to point out one thing that I absolutely love from the BUCS method, and it comes down once again like that diagram will be up here, so you have a better visualization. But there is a mandated coin toss at the beginning of this game. So what happens is there's a coin toss. I think it's whoever traveled farther gets to call a coin toss. Yep. Whoever wins gets to select one of three things. The loser of the coin toss gets the other two. You are also allowed to defer, and if you defer, the other team can't defer back. So you get to pick one of the three things that you want here. Which set of hoops to defend, so you get a choice there. Which team's quaffle runner, they choose their starting position first, and and the beater who's on the midline gets to choose their starting position first. So I think what I like about that is you gotta figure out what's the best strategy, because inherently, based off statistics, most people are right-handed. So most likely you'd want to be on the left side of the starting line there, so you can reach down with your right hand and not reach across your body. However, do you want that for your quaffle player so they can get a better position? Do you want that for your beater? Do you have a quaffle player who do you think will win regardless of reaching down with one hand or the other? There's some tactics there that if you really metagame it and really think about it, super interesting. But does that fix all the other kind of issues that are possibly there?
I mean, that is super interesting. And if every team was playing at the level where they're trying to maximize strategy, I think it would be very interesting to see. But we've already seen a large divide in the skill gap between the top teams and the bottom teams, and adding in decision making to inexperienced captains. Like, we already see issues enough with teams knowing what to do optimally with snitch on pitch. You then add in another factor to give more benefit to the teams who are doing more skill. And while some people would argue that that's good, because, you know, if you're the most skillful and you're thinking the hardest, you should win. And while that's true, it shouldn't. We need to try to bring down the gap between our top teams and our bottom teams, and that doesn't help do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I had written down like 2 points on the box method. Like, one of them being like handedness and like the aspect of skill, kind of like you're touching on, Kyle. Like, we don't need there to be an additional skill and something to consider when, like you said, the top teams are at arguably the top that they've ever really been, versus like the bottom teams are kind of, we're getting newer teams, and we don't want to lose those teams because the top teams are already so skilled that another skill element would just kind of like exponentially grow that gap, which is not what we want. The other thing that I thought was interesting too was like the idea of the game excitement, where on Brooms Up you have the two teams running together. Obviously, we want to keep that game excitement without the injuries. Just from an entertainment perspective, we want people to enjoy watching the sport without being an automatic goal, which is, again, without testing, it's hard to tell that it's going to be an automatic goal, but just from seeing how things are laid out, that's like the biggest worry, is that you're just going to get these like almost guaranteed goals right off the start because one guy's faster or one girl's faster than another.
And are good at shooting, and the hoops are farther apart, so there's more space between the beater and the target, and even so, like a keeper's running on from the sideline.
Yeah.
Is the keeper's now got to be faster than the person with the ball to get to that hoop before the ball's sailing through.
Yeah.
And at the same time contest with whatever chasers behind them.
Behind him, yeah.
So you could throw up, once again, and I know he's a human cheat code, but you could throw a John Gola behind the hoops and then just get the ball, skyhook that sucker all the way to the other side of the field, and easy goal. Like, there's
or you have you can have your chaser run in and be a human meat shield for the beater.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have them directly interfere with the beater because that would be a card, but you can have them, if they're faster than the beater, they will stand between the beater and you, and now you have more time to advance the ball as they try to take one for the president.
It makes me think of probably my favorite like defensive quaffle player move I've ever seen, and it was last year in MLQ. With swatting was obviously the included like subtext of this. Teddy Costa on the Boston Knight Riders, now the Boston Forge, basically saw a bludger being thrown back to the other side. I think they were playing Austin, and it might have been someone else, but basically like turned around, saw us in the air, and tried diving and swatting it back toward his side to keep the bludger away from like his offensive zone or like their defensive zone. So they didn't have use of a bludger, and it's like smart little tactics like that, just completely sacrificing a body. Do that. That's like a very high level like skill critical move, and just having that as like the start of the game, just like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna. My job is to go and run in front of a bludger. Yeah. Not really, like...
Well, I like to... Whenever I'm making rules or thinking about things in Twitch, I like to think, like, what's the best that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? Best that can happen, you have two evenly matched, great teams. They do the Bucks method, and it would probably be a lot of fun to watch. It'd be interesting to see the strategies. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. It would be definitely more exciting than a tip-off. Because I'm not particularly excited when I see the beginning of a basketball game. I'm excited that the basketball game's starting, but I'm not excited by the start of the game. But what's the worst that can happen? Well, you have one team's faster than the other. One team's, say, the first ranked team in the league, and the other one's the bottom ranked team in the league. And you just have off the jump one team getting destroyed by another team because it's all on this one beater to collect the ball and make the beat. And maybe the person getting the ball is a Nathan Reed type whose only thing that he likes to do is just block beats. So just wait for the beat, block the beat, throw it in. And that's not going to be fun for anyone. So I'd rather go a middle approach and go with something that maybe not as interesting, but is definitely less prone to large swings in what you'd see and less prone to resulting in one team getting destroyed out of the game.
Lower risk, lower reward. There's lower risk of some giant injury happening, but it's like, okay, the game started.
Yeah, the opposite would be true if we were in a league where everyone was of a matched skill level. We'd be looking for ways to implement more skill into the game to make a bigger gap so that teams could beat each other. But since that's not what we're seeing, and we have teams that are clearly at the top, clearly have like a middle chunk, and we have a bottom chunk, do we really want to be adding more nuance and making the game harder to teach new people and continually to give benefit to the people who have been in the sport for 7+ years, who know everything, who eat, sleep, and breathe Quidditch? Probably not. We've already seen what happens when teams are formed that have a lot of experience and play against teams that don't have experience. And what we've seen through watching the league over the past couple of years is a team doesn't need to practice if they already know what they're doing. And teams can practice as hard as they want, but you can't make up for what you lack in experience.
Very fair.
Yeah. Now, on the topic of leagues, and we'll kind of touch base on like league format and scheduling. So we've talked about it before in other podcasts. Just getting people's perspective on sort of how Quidditch in Canada is structured on a game by game basis. So obviously, as we know, it's kind of tournament based. So teams will host tournaments, as many tournaments as we can before we have our regionals and some years hopefully nationals. Hopefully with every team going. But I guess the point I'm trying to get at here, Kyle, is where obviously things are doing with COVID and that might change things kind of already for the next season. But where do you kind of see the scheduling of Quidditch and kind of games and how we schedule a season going the direction?
So COVID, like COVID has been doing, is screwing everything up. So originally for this year, the gameplay department / myself had plans for being a little bit more hands-on in the tournament scheduling, because right now Quidditch Canada is very, very hands-off. We say, okay, you need to play 3 games before regionals in order for the ranking algorithm to rank you for it. You go do that by yourself. If you want help, sure, message us and we'll help you with organizing structures, organizing schedules. No one has ever asked me to help them make a schedule. I was surprised constantly that no one asked for it, but that's fine. Everyone runs it pretty well. I don't think I've been to a poorly run tournament that I can recall. I've been to some tournaments that became poorly ran because of weather, but it's Canada. What are you going to do? But the original plan was to start making. We didn't settle on a name for them, but kind of event weekends where on one day there would be essentially a little mini tournament, not like a full-blown 12-team tournament, just a one day you play each other a bunch of times to get a lot of practice. And the other day is more of a team development day, which is essentially a joint practice, sending in some QC reps to give some talks on referees. So we also, in that training day, train out some new referees. We have them go through some scrimmages and actually ref those games to get practice. We talk to the captains of teams and we talk about, what are effective drills, what you need to be doing at practice, strategies you should be thinking about, and essentially having those people who have been in the game for 7+ years, those who are at the top of the game, know everything, start to deliver their knowledge to the people who are fresh to the game, have only been playing for a couple of years, who are recently made captains or organizers of their teams, to try to bring the skill gap that I was talking about down and also make a much stronger sense of community. Because I know many years ago, the norm was to have large after parties after most tournaments where you really got a sense of community, you got to know people. And with the way tournaments have gone, socials, yes.
Socials.
Sure. Socials. Hydrating socials. But with the way tournaments have gone, with more teams being invited, games going longer, days going longer, most people need to head back home and can't afford to stay for partying. I mean, socialing. And so they choose to go back home. So there's much less of a sense of community, and each team is now just kind of friends with themselves in their own little bubble. And we're trying to bring the sense of community back, bring the knowledge that everyone has together to help out teams that are struggling, and move forward together. So that was originally the plan. So it's not quite a league, but it's more of a hands-on, yes, you can play in your own tournaments, but we're going to try to plan with you some of these big events where games are ran. And that was originally the plan before COVID. And of course, this season was canceled, so we didn't do that. Going forward, we will still be looking to do that. We were even looking last year to do a kind of a boot camp on a weekend before the school year even started. So we're still looking to do that, though right now that looks rather unlikely with the way the world is. But all that to say is we like parts of how tournaments are now, but things could definitely afford to be scaled down a little bit in size and get in more games and less competitive tournaments. Like, tournaments don't need to have a winner, in my opinion. I know some people disagree, but you don't need to have a bracket where after, a couple hours, your team's out and you're done. You play one consolation game and you sit around watching the bronze medal, the gold medal, etc. At least not regional still needs that, but the tournaments leading out of that don't need a winner. And what we want to try to have teams do more is create more tournaments where maybe it's just round robin. There's no playoffs at the end. It's just you play a bunch of games a day. You get in your practice. You get in your games before regionals. Then you come to regionals, and that's where you lay everything on the line and you play for rank. So in that way, hopefully, part of the issue gets resolved where the teams that are the best continue to be the best because they get the most practice in games because they play the most games. So hopefully this could even things out a little bit and lead to a better look and feel to the season than we had in the past couple of years. But with COVID, certainly it is likely, and I won't say anything definitively, as we're still waiting on seeing how the vaccination schedule shapes up. But with out-of-province travel and out-of-city travel being kind of a no-no right now, we're definitely looking at how we can segment the regions, east and west, up to allow for teams to play with people in their local region and play more games with them. And then maybe we come together for a regionals tournament if that makes sense to do so next year. Maybe instead we have divisional championships. The titles aren't finalized or even really thought about at this point, but it's definitely is a possibility for next year that we experiment with smaller divisions and these community days within those divisions. And then moving on from that year, we look at, well, did we like that, or do we want to open things back up and have all the teams able to pick and choose their tournaments and go to them?
So I want to point out something real quick, and this is purely personal opinion. This is not me. This is not an attack on anyone. And I think we could all look and kind of have a similar enough opinion, I would think. And I think we can look back the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years if we're really going far back, and say, when you look amongst the college or university versus community split there is, I would say in the East, maybe in the West as well, there's a little bit. I think the West does a great job about being very community driven and helping each other. But I think there was a lot of animosity for a lot of years about, like, oh, well, we're the community teams, we're the college teams, we don't want to interact, and like Valhalla did a great job of trying to like help people come out to socials and be good about like spreading that. But I think there was animosity even the years where the three of us as Otters players, I think there was animosity there because people were like, oh, who are these Joe like schmoes who are just friggin' coming out and not practicing, not doing anything, and
what do you mean
winning?
Joe schmoes? You mean, who are these people who have won gold medals previously? The best players in Canada coming together. Joe schmoes, sure.
Yeah. Making up a fair amount of like national team or like, yeah, a whole bunch of international experience and yada yada. But like you look at that and realize like, okay, like it happened. Players want to play and they were looking for an avenue to do so, and it happened. And I think looking forward, we got to do a good job about like, hey, let's reconcile whatever happened in the past is in the past. Let's help each other going forward. Like I am one of 2 or 3 people who went and played on. I think I'm one of 2 people who went and played on a like Guelph-based teams with Guelph or Royal City, and has played on a different team since. There is very little like movement when it comes to the Guelph program because they are so strong and tight, and they stay, and they can allow players to stay for years after. But I think looking forward, we got to build as a community in total, and that means some smaller teams maybe have to put in a bigger commitment, coming out to more stuff. Bigger teams have to be more in fighting. Teams that are like more like out there and outgoing have to have shyer teams like have their chance to shine and say their bit, and shy teams have to step up and do like say their bit. So like everyone has to contribute in a way to build this up, and we can't just be like, oh well, community teams, experienced players, show us the way. Like no community player or like older player really wants to do that a ton, because a lot of those players are doing a great job running QC right now. Kyle is a professor and does a department. Yara has a part-time job and runs the organization. Like Brittany Catane is the communications director, and she's played for years. Like everyone has a part to play here, and we can't put it on a couple people. We all have to work together to make these things work better and step up. If you want this thing to grow and continue, everyone has to help.
And the games are just going to be more fun. Like if you help struggling teams get better, you're going to have more enjoyable games. Like the reason we went with the Naftal slide and then what I had called the Naftal Ross slide for so long was because we wanted competitive games. And then eventually people got tired of playing the same teams over and over again, and we went back to a more traditional format. But if you want to have fun regionals and nationals throughout, and you want to have competitive games, we all need to help out with helping the new players, the experienced players, get the experience and get the knowledge they need to compete. Sorry, I cut you off, Gabe. What were you saying?
No, I was just gonna say, like, the way I kind of think of it is almost like a generational thing. So like the first generation, like Quidditch 1.0, if you will, was kind of with the I remember like from Queens where they had, I just picture the Queens tournament they had in front of Vic Hall with those called like those buckets and like the brooms and like the nerdier side of it. That would be like kind of the first generation. Second generation was kind of moving away from that, trying to make it more of a sport, if you will. And then we're kind of in this like Quidditch 3.0 phase almost, where it's kind of like I'm kind of like a hybrid in between kind of Quidditch 2.0 and this like sort of Quidditch 3.0. Where we're kind of seeing more of this athletic shift. Like we're kind of pushing further and further away from the Harry Potter narrative. I think we've kind of passed that by now, but it's more focused on, like I said, the athletic and the skill-based aspects of it. And kind of the one thing I wanted to touch on too, and we kind of touched on it a little bit here, was like the skill gap. So like for you, Kyle, what do you think? Like obviously everyone has their opinion of what they think is going to change, like kind of shift that gap. But what do you think is going to be the most beneficial for some of the smaller up and coming teams to kind of, because obviously there's always going to be a skill gap. It's like in any sport, you're always going to have that gap. But obviously with the newer sport, it's harder to like address it, I guess. But what do you think is sort of the best approach? I know you kind of mentioned more games. Is there anything else that people have kind of given feedback about that you think maybe something we can kind of implement into the sport?
I mean, there needs to be more resources for rules, and certainly I'm working to develop those resources. Most recently, we talked about maybe, and this is not final, and by no means will we for sure do this, but just as an example, as we talked about, maybe I create a crash course on the rule book, especially this most recent one, to give to people. More resources on that, resources on coaches. I know we recently put out some videos on I believe that the Gola was in, or Gola created on Kidditch.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I right? I'm right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can certainly create more resources in that way. Certainly more reps, more games. But from a gameplay side, and the reason some of the rule changes were made this year was to bring it down. So I see the main issue is from the skill of beaters and how impactful beaters are in the play that we've seen in the last couple of years. And certainly teams with the best beaters are the ones who tend to be the best. They also tend to be the ones with the best chasers, but that's because their teams are good.
What came first, chicken or the egg? Like, do you have good chasers because you have good beaters, or you just have good players? Yeah. Like, what is? Yeah.
But I will say I do not see a team that does very well if they only have good chasers. However, I do see teams that do well if they have good beaters. So I'm more inclined to say it's the beaters running the ship. So certainly some of the changes with switching to two-arm form tackling will help to bring down the gap because then beaters are less impactful on defense. So if your beaters are getting absolutely run over by the other team's beaters, well, you're still there to wrap some people and bring it down. And certainly it is easier to wrap and tackle with two arms than trying to practice one arm. I know some people have gotten good at it, but that's something you need to get good at and have practice at, which if you tell someone who especially came from a rugby background or a football background, okay, now tackle with one arm, they're not going to be great out of the game. And then the changes with the third bludger that I talked about last time I was on the podcast will certainly help to bring down the gap between the beaters. But we need more resources for teams about how to play the game, the rules of the game, so that they can start to understand the strategy of it. And then also the community days that I talked about are probably going to be the biggest bet, because other than that, I can't tell a team to let Quidditch Canada help them to be better, but we can provide resources that if teams want to have the initiative and they want to be better and they want to do better and they want to learn and be part of the community, that they can engage with and that are worth their time to put into, is really the goal of the gameplay department in the next year or two as we come back from the pandemic.
So on that topic of third bludger kind of stuff, one thing we didn't get to talk about as much last time, and I think we've seen it over the last year or two with the square field and more like defined out of bounds, is a scenario of what happens when a bludger goes out of bounds and who gets claim to it. I am an AR and I understand this rule, and it's very high for that, like fast and high paced, but I see as a player the amount of times this gets miscalled. Can you just explain what happens?
So the issue with people doing this rule is that the rules for the quaffle are different, one, and the second one, a lot of people grow up playing 10-bit soccer or just soccer in general. Everyone's familiar with soccer and basketball, which is it goes to the other team. Whoever touched it last doesn't get the ball. It goes to the other team. With the bludger, with the quaffle, that's how it is. It goes to the other team who didn't touch it. Just like soccer, easy to understand. The bludger is not that. The bludger goes to the closest eligible beater when the ball goes out of bounds. And what eligible beater means is doesn't already have a ball or a bludger and isn't knocked out. Other than that, it goes to the closest person, even if that person was the person who put it out of bounds. The exception to that would be if a person intentionally puts it out of bounds, because that's a card. But that's a different matter entirely. So if I'm standing at the sideline and I'm going to beat Bryan, and I beat Bryan and it goes out, and I'm the closest beater, that is my ball. Doesn't matter that I'm the one who put it out. Say I go to beat Bryan and I miss, it goes out of bounds. If I'm the closest, it's my ball. It is always the closest beater. If there are no beaters running towards the ball, you just put the ball down. I forget the amount of inches or feet. 1 foot inside, 5 inches inside. I forget the exact dimension.
Let's say a foot.
You set it down just inside the line, and you let them get it. Say you're an AR and you're standing still, because that's typically how you go about repping, and there's a beater sprinting, 2 beaters sprinting at you. You declare which one it is their ball, and if they're just sprinting for the ball, you let them go and get it. You don't tell them to wait and go get the ball for them. They can go get it because they're going to beat you to it, and they want the ball faster. I think that's everything in all the cases that you typically run into.
So I got one question because I've seen it happen in film, which made me think about asking you about this. So there was a play where Team A had 2 bludgers. They had control. The other team had 1 bludger. For some reason they split up, and the person with no bludger went for the lone for like one of the beaters on the side, and sure. They just got beat. They started running back. So they're out of play. The other 2 had a bludger battle, and one person missed, and the other person, the person who missed was the person who didn't have control, like the team that didn't have control, and the person who hit was the team who had control already. That person then basically watched as the ball was going out of bounds, dropped their ball, and waited until that ball went out of bounds, and then claimed that one. What happens there? Because it is the most ridiculous, like, third bludger manipulation, and I think this was a USQ match, but it was just like, I don't know. I think I stumped Kyle.
That's a good question. As written, I do not believe if you were to drop a bludger, you do not have possession of it any longer. And I know this because I looked in this past year to add in some sort of stipulation that if you just drop it in front of you, you saw possession of it to prevent things like
triple bludger immunity.
Triple bludger, yeah. To prevent things like that. After reading the rulebook for a while and trying to figure out some wording that would make sense and doesn't break other things, I realized there was no good solution, so I didn't add in any changes. Because the main thing that, if you say that if you intentionally drop a bludger on the ground, it's still in your possession, it removes 1.5s from the game. Or 0.5s from the game.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can no longer toss that ball back and go try to get another bludger, because that ball's still yours.
Yeah.
Until someone else picks it up. So it is no longer in their possession when they drop it. So technically, they do not have a bludger. So they are an eligible beater. So that is their ball if they're closest. Final answer.
Nice. If you do this and get a card because you do it improperly, it's not my fault. There's just this crappy rule stipulation that I saw one time, and it was like, I've never seen it executed again in any way possible. But, yeah.
Cool. So I think to wrap up then with this episode, I think we'll kind of touch base on, kind of we're leaning towards going over it, but not really, but was just like the idea of reffing in general, and more specifically like being a good HR. So Kyle, do you want to talk about sort of maybe ideas about ref training, the idea of workshops, what works, what doesn't when it comes to training refs, what we can work on to help train better refs, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. First, I'll note that once again, we're not touching on the advantage rule that I created, that I mentioned at the end of last podcast.
Oh.
But I'll carry on. That's fine.
We'll get into that after. We'll get into it after.
Sure. Yeah, head reffing is very hard. It's not an easy thing. The thing that makes it hard, especially in Canada, is we made it such that to make things fair, each team has to provide some refs, or they get fined because we ended up relying too heavily on one team, and one or two people from those teams, usually they're the head refs, end up reffing 13 games in a tournament, and other teams ref a couple. So we try to be making a push to having it that every team has a suite of refs to use to even things out, so that one team, and it's typically a team who has a lot of experience, so they're usually doing well in the tournament, so they have games until the end and are also refing forever. Try to even things out. But I recognize that it's very difficult to join a sport, play it for maybe a year, then you read a very dense, very long rule book with a lot of niche rules, and then you write a test online, and then, okay, now that you've wrote this test, go ref a game. Is an insane jump from just a theoretical knowledge and like, yeah, you've seen the rules applied because you've seen people head ref around you for a year or two. But to just go out and say, okay, now do a field test is a crazy jump. So in terms of like referee resources, there definitely needs to be some sort of video or crash course of like, these are the important rules, this is what to look for. And I think also, whether or not, the hard part is that as policies are written, in order for a game to be official, it needs to be officiated by official HR or someone who is doing a field test. So that makes it so that, and then you need 3 official games before regionals. So it makes it so that there's no time to have unofficial games at tournaments. You can't make the consolation games unofficial by having someone practice reffing. So the only practice you can do is with your own team at your own practices. But I found, at least at Queens and Mississauga, if we actually practice, that people do not go nearly hard enough at practice to be a worthwhile reffing experience. Like, people aren't tackling fully, rules are kind of loose, people aren't taking it the most seriously. So there definitely needs to be some way for people to ref, not in official capacity, to get the experience and see how it's done. So the community days that I talked about earlier are definitely a way to do that. Whether or not we do like mandatory shadowing, where probably me, I take around a group of people and I have them watch me ref and I talk about the reffing, whether or not maybe we stick a GoPro to my head and I verbally talk through a game as I'm reffing it, whether or not I verbally go through a pre-recorded game and ref that. There's definitely resources to be made. Because I understand it is a struggle, and it's especially hard as a head ref with 2 years experience. Sure, you've completed a quiz and you passed a field test, but then you're supposed to go and you're supposed to ref a team which has players who played for 10 years and for sure know the rules better than you do. How do you do that? With any sort of confidence. And confidence, to answer one of your questions, Gabe, of what makes it good to HR, and it is confidence. In the early years when I started head reffing, I went from reffing the consolation games to reffing the finals or I guess it wasn't the finals, but it was like a bronze medal game. I went from the consolation to the bronze medal in about 2 games of one tournament. So not a whole lot of time, just kind of thrust into the fire of, hey, you're the only one around.
Trial by fire.
Trial by fire.
You should know the rules. You're tangentially related to gameplay. I think I was barely involved at that point, but you should know it. Just like go ref it. And I remember there were situations that came up that I did not know what the rule was. I think it was someone went to make a beat, and then as the person was getting beat, they knew they were beat, so they went to dismount and they whipped around. And in whipping around, their rear end hit the bludger while it was in the air and knocked it away from the beater. And then one of the teams complained that they swatted the bludger away. And what do you do in that scenario? Right? So an insane scenario. I'm sure there's a complicated rules explanation for what you should or shouldn't do. At the time, I didn't care. I didn't know the rules. I looked at it and I went, that looked not shady, but it definitely benefited one team. So what do? Well, you stop the game. And I brought the two captains. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. That was not intentional, but it did cause a thing. As written, should receive a card, but that makes no sense to me. So it makes no sense to follow the rules as written. So here's what I'm going to do. Here's what's reasonable. Captains, are you happy? They both said, yes, that is the best thing to do. And we carried on. So the most important thing to reffing is not knowing the rules. So you should definitely read the rule book more than people do currently, because there's a lot of rules that people should know that they don't know. But the biggest thing is just being able to tell, and this is an experience thing, when things look wrong. Quidditch has a usual flow to it. Typically, things look a certain way. You need to kind of be able to learn when it looks wrong and just kind of develop an intuition of, okay, should I stop play and fix that? And teams are going to like you a lot more if you stop things and fix it, even if you don't card it or you're not following the rules exactly. As long as the pace of play is good, teams will be happy. Now, this isn't the case with all teams. There's certainly teams that would prefer for the rules to be enforced as strictly as possible. I'm not one of those people. I prefer game flow over following the rules to a T, as long as you're applying the rules evenly to both teams. So the biggest thing is just having the confidence to stop the game, say, here's what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. Teams agree and you move on. And along with that confidence, a lot of people seem to think that in Quidditch, captains can overturn calls. And they absolutely cannot. It's written into the rules, or at least it was for a time. Like, captains used to be able to be on the field. Now they have to ask to come on the field in some rule books, or can only come on the field during stop play. But there's become this dynamic within the community that after every play is stopped, the captains come on. The captain who is on the team that's getting the card yells a bunch and complains about the card, and the other captain just kind of mills around and will then yell if the other captain is saying something that's wrong, and then they all fight each other and move on. But you guys have played Quidditch for a number of years. How often do you see a head ref listen to a captain and overturn a call?
Pretty rarely. I'm usually the AR that's on the side with the edges.
I would say it's really never. You don't see it.
Yeah.
Unless I've done it a few times to some head refs, and I'm sorry, head refs, where they try to cite a rule at me, and I say, actually, no, this is the rule, and you're wrong, and they listen to me. They shouldn't. Stop listening to me. Just do the rule that you think is right, and adjudicate the card. Don't overturn the call. But that's kind of the main thing is, even if the person who's yelling at you knows more than you know, or knows a rule better than you know, you got to go with your gut. Once you make a decision, that's it. You look at the NHL. They have the situation room to overturn some things, but the situation room isn't there to overturn penalties. When a ref calls a penalty, it could be the weakest, softest penalty in the world. It could be not a penalty. The situation room doesn't call in and say, hey, that's not a penalty. No, it's a penalty because the ref says it's a penalty, we move on. So I think the biggest fear for new referees is the intimidation factor of having someone yell at them. And you have to understand that you have 100% of the power. There is nothing that the captain can do to you other than give you an unfavorable score on your ref sheet. The worst thing that you can do the captain is give the player a card and then give the captain a card for being rude to you. And we've changed in this upcoming rule book. It used to be a blue card or a yellow card at your discretion to anyone sassing you. In this next rule book, we've delineated out what's kind of a blue card offense and what's a yellow card offense to say, okay, definitely give blues if people do this to you. And then if it's above that, then at your discretion, give yellows. So we want to promote people giving cards to teams whose benches are constantly yelling and constantly complaining and constantly disrespecting an official. Because at the end of the day, the official's right, you're wrong, so be quiet and sit at your bench. And we need to move away from what's happened the past couple of years of referees and teams fighting all the time. What the referee says goes. You're not changing their mind. That's it. You come up, you say, what's the call? They tell you the call. They tell you the reasoning. You go, okay. You go back to your bench. Maybe you mumble to your team that the ref was wrong. Maybe you don't. Who knows? But you certainly do not tell the referee you're wrong. You certainly don't tell the referee that they need to wear their glasses because they're blind. If you said that to me, you know who you are.
Damn.
But that's the thing, is as a community, we need to make things easier for refs. We need to stop being so hard on refs. We need to understand that we need refs, we want refs, and we can't be yelling at our refs, and that it does nothing. And that way refs can gain more confidence. We give them games that they can practice at, and just go with what you think. Just make the call.
So I want to give this idea out there you had a very good point. I wanted to let you say your piece, Kyle. Just rewinding back for 2 seconds, when we were talking about all the ideas for how we can train head refs better, whether it's the shadowing, the sticking a GoPro on your head, whatever, it kind of popped in my mind, but almost all of Quidditch there is like teams who play a little differently, but the base level of Quidditch is like you play a half court, then you play a half court, then you play a half court. Some teams run in transition and play differently. But could you in some way like grade an HR just by having them ref like a half court set at a practice or something like that, assuming it's all called properly?
I mean, you can like test them. You can test them. Like in the last year, people were allowed to run a proper game at their practices and send me video, and I would grade them and give them feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But that's to get tested, right?
Yeah.
That's not getting you experience.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah.
Like, sure, it's still getting you experience because you're reffing a game, but it's a lower intensity game than anything you're going to see in a tournament.
Yeah, I mean it more. Not like it's not like experience. More experience is always better. Like you get more experience is better. Same thing in Quidditch. You play more and more, you're going to get better. But I mean this in the pure like testing requirement sense. Like, okay,
yeah,
we don't have.
You can currently do that. Let an HR test, field test, does not need to be an official game. It just needs to be a proper game, from start to finish. Snitches, half times you switch sides, do the whole shebang. It just needs to be a real game. It doesn't need to be official.
I was just gonna say like having a compilation of a whole bunch of like half court sets. Like if you had like 15 half court sets that are ref properly, proper cards are given at all points where necessary, yada yada yada. Do you think that's a possibility, or do you think that's not good enough when it comes to like acceptable certification?
As a resource, you mean? I'm not sure I understand the question.
As I would say, you're the current standards like submit a game, like game film.
Yeah.
What if you did instead, like you had 20 half court sets, like defense versus offense, you could switch them halfway through, whatever, and have the ref or HR ref that. And have enough sets of it.
No, because we need to see how they do all parts of the game, including like the stitch on pitch and the brooms up and the adjudicating time and.
Okay, that's fair.
It needs to be a full game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Awesome. Well,
I mean, do you guys have any thoughts? I'll open the floor to stuff we can do for helping with refs and what you see is a good referee. And when you think of the good referees in Quidditch in Canada, what are the characteristics that you guys see? Because I feel like I've ranted for a while. Let's open the floor.
Confidence is definitely one of the biggest things. Like being confident in your calls, even though like you said, one of the head refs or one of the head coaches on the team can know more on the rule than you do, but being confident in your call, you know it's wrong, but you learn from it, you move on, but you stick with your calls. So not really getting like rattled by team benches.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say like I actually haven't done the AR testing yet. It's crazy I haven't. But what I was gonna say is like I've done a little bit of reffing with like Queens of the intramurals, and like one of the things that it's just intramurals, but one thing that like kind of what Nate was saying is just confidence for sure, but also just being able to diffuse a situation and just be calm as an individual yourself. Obviously it's incredibly high stress situations you're dealing with, like split second decisions you have to kind of make the call, and just being able to kind of be okay, like both sides have stake in the game and they're going to fight their side, but you have to be able as an individual to kind of say, okay, like have the confidence to make the call and also be like, hey, you need to calm down. You need to calm down. And if they don't calm down, you need to make the decision to just say, okay, I'm going to start giving out cards. I know I'm a pretty hot-headed person and this is like directed at myself, but at the end of the day, as a referee, if you need to make a difficult decision, i.e. giving out cards, then that's a decision you need to make to keep the game under control. Because there's been times where, again, I think the root cause of it is the confidence aspect of it, but there's been times in games where things have just gotten way out of control because a ref has just been afraid to say, okay, you're getting a card, and this is your second time doing it, so you're out of the game kind of thing. You know what I mean? Because it's usually the same people that are kind of going on and on and on about a call, and it just kind of carries over and things just start getting way too aggressive. So yeah, for me, it's confidence, being able to diffuse a situation, and just being kind of calm, being calm in a situation that's not calm, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, you just kind of have to dissociate for the 25 minutes that you're reffing. Go to your happy place, just observe the game, make the calls, and don't worry about it in the moment, but definitely lose sleep about it afterwards is what I do. Calm in the moment, confident in the moment, and then I lose sleep about missed calls.
Yeah, that Untitled like also just show that like you have control of the game. Like you said, you have the power. So like showing the game or showing the teams early on, you have like you're in control of the game. Everything's gonna run through you. Like you won't take people's crap, I guess. Yeah. But you'll let the game like run smoothly, let it flow.
I mean, it's even why like I started games with anyone who's been in a game that I've ref knows that I start with the hi, my name is Kyle, I'll be your head ref for this game. And it's more of a thing just to hype me up and say like, yes, I am here, I am the head ref, this is the game. Then it gets you in the zone, it gets you yelling because I yell it to get used to yelling. It gets you out of the player mindset into the okay, I'm the head ref now, I'm in charge mindset. So do whatever you can to hype yourself up and get in the zone to be a bit of a meanie for 25 minutes.
I got 2 points really quickly. I'll keep it brief. But one, and I noticed it occasionally in Quidditch and people complain about it, but I see it a lot more and hear more about it when I watch hockey, in that you don't have to call penalties equally. If one team is not, I wouldn't say playing dirty, but playing in a conduct that would get them carded, give them cards. If one team isn't, you don't have to balance it out. Like, it doesn't have to be 1 for 1, doesn't have to be 2 for 2. Like, if a team gets 5 cards and the other team gets 0 or 1, that's fine. That's how
it just needs to be consistent.
Yeah.
What is and is not a card needs to stay the same between the teams.
Absolutely. That's way more important.
You'll see, typically in the finals, I let a lot more things go because both teams are kind of shoving each other a little bit, and you let them play because they're going to have more fun playing than you stop them every 2 seconds for a little bit of pushing. Whatever, everyone's pushing, it's fine. If it starts to get out of control, then yeah, sure, here's the cards and we're going to stop. Mm-hmm. But in general, people don't care so much about the calls themselves as long as it's reasonable. What they care about is the flow of the game, and if people are getting injured and hurt every 2 seconds, ruining the flow of the game, and they're getting hurt in illegal ways, or you're stopping the play every 2 seconds for a card or to turn over a ball, that's when people are going to get pissed off. They don't care if you make a blown call, whatever. They should be able to adapt and overcome to the power play.
I think
just keep the flow good.
I think I heard something somewhere, and it was like, as a ref, it's better to be consistently inconsistent than inconsistently consistent. It's like, yeah, if you are doing one thing that's like, you're calling it one way, if you're doing it consistently, great. If you're calling it one way one time, calling it the next way the next time, no one's going to know what's going on. The other thing I was going to say real quick, and this is just the simplest thing. As an HR, you are the head of this reffing pyramid, but you have ARs. The best HRs I've reffed under will listen to their ARs. They'll still make the final decision, but like, if an HR comes up to me and says, hey, what did you see? I saw this. You tell them what they saw, and they can make a decision off it. Do you think it's worth it? I don't think so. Okay, cool. If a head ref's focused on the quaffle, like, one way in a bludger battles going the other way, the HR is never going to see it. You got to trust your ARs, and your ARs have to be doing their job. If you're an AR...
But also hot take, if you want to gain some confidence as an HR, whenever a team complains about the beaters, just blame it on the ARs. It's not kind. It's not nice. But it's true.
But to be fair...
As an HR, you are watching the quaffle game, and if something else happens and any coach is giving you lip, you just saw them, you didn't see it, and the ARs said no.
And to be fair, as an AR, yes, kind of, because that is our job. Like, we are supposed to be watching bludger game, unless, like, you have one AR who's, like, been told to stick with the quaffle game, because I've seen that before. But, like, you have a purpose there, ARs. Do your job, help your HR, and hopefully they can listen to you, and you will be a valuable member of the team. Cool. Kyle, you wanted to talk about it.
I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to be asked about it.
Your favorite little creation.
Yes.
Advantage.
Advantage. Explain.
There's a lot to it. I think this is Canada exclusive. Like we don't. There's nothing happening in other regions that do it like this. Break it down. What caused it? What is it? How does it work? Why is it good?
Yeah, so originally, the way that advantage works. So advantage is when a team fouls another team, and stopping the play would be advantageous for the team that fouled. You let the play continue. And what originally it was